The topic is ethics in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But before we get into that topic, when people hear Fourth Industrial Revolution, I don't think they understand what that actually means. So can you give me some examples of technologies which would kind of embody the Fourth Industrial Revolution?
Okay. Well, I mean, I could speak, when you're going back to the third revolution, in Third Industrial Revolution, you're really talking about computerization, are you not? So you're talking about, you have an Apple IIc computer, or you have an IBM computer. But then when your Fourth Industrial Revolution kicks in, you're really talking about a lot of digital technologies. You would talk about things like artificial intelligence. We're dealing with a lot of automation at the level of robotics and drones and things like that would certainly be what I would consider Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, indeed. So the difference is perhaps that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is not about you making friends on Facebook or buying your groceries online. It's more about your fridge, buying your groceries online, having learned what you like on Facebook. So it's basically a technology which interacts with other technologies to impact on our environment. So this is perhaps the kernel of the change that we're seeing these days.
I think today a lot of people have kind of two reactions about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, about the idea of technologies and interacting with other technologies, excitement or fear. So I want to hear from both of you, given your very different perspectives. Are you excited about the future or are you afraid?
I'm both. And the reasons why one should be both excited and concerned is the same one. To allow technologies to do exactly this thing, to mediate with other technologies and the environment, we are reshaping the environment. We're doing something that in engineering is called enveloping. So, a dishwasher, we don't have a mini robot in a cube who's washing the dishes the way we do. We re-engineered the old way of washing dishes so that a machine could do it. We're doing the same also to enable digital technologies to work in our environment, which means we're going to have smart cities, smart schools, smart houses, and this enables new things to happen. At which point, how do we make sure that the new environment is something that allows us as humans to flourish, that respect our values, our cultures? These are open questions which we need to get right, otherwise we will be in a very problematic situation.
So communication is an area where I'm both very happy and excited, but I'm also very concerned. With the speed of technological development as it comes to people interacting in social media, for example, or other communications means, is technology moving at such a speed that people are losing their ability really to reflect before they say something? Or is this situation of an encounter where people are face to face, just like we are in this studio today? That is really not easy to have transpire in a social media environment where people are at fixed telephone or fixed mobile telephones or at their computer screens, at their laptops in different countries even. There's an element of a personal encounter that's lost. And people think that they're communicating more because they're communicating faster. But the question for me that I'm particularly concerned about is whether they're communicating less at an effective level. Are they losing a certain amount of the personal encounter? Are they losing a certain amount of their humanity?
So I think a lot of people would say the Fourth Industrial Revolution obviously brings positives, right? I mean, I think it'd be very hard to convince people to throw away the technologies they have today. And there's also some negatives. So whose job is it to make sure, to steer the Fourth Industrial Revolution to ensure that it's actually serving human interests? Right now, whose job is it?
Everybody's. The technology we have is very complex, and most of it is developed by the private sector, who at this point has the most advanced understanding of this technology. So we cannot think of going forward without having them sitting at the table when we discuss where are we going. At the same time, we need policymakers within institutions, government, because they are the one that by the social contract we think are there for the good of society. But we also need the users, the schools, the NGOs, all those who are using the technologies, and to become first more aware of what this technology, how it works, but also to participate in a discussion which is not just about technology. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is also telling us something that was not, let's say, peculiar of other revolutions related to technology, which is that these technologies are becoming fundamental in our societies. They are a driver to shape our societies, so our interactions and our environment. So we cannot afford to delegate the discussion about what kind of technology and therefore what kind of societies we're going to have just to one part of it. We need to sit all around the table, I'm afraid, and trying to discuss. this discussion has to be an informed one. So expertise has to become something that we want to regain and we want to have there more than perhaps we've done in the past.
And whose job is it to actually ensure that conversation happens right now? Because I think everyone kind of would acknowledge that there should be conversation from every level about the technologies that are going to shape the future. But I think everyone's kind of right now confused about whose job it is to actually convene those bodies together, right, and to actually provide focus.
And it's a very interesting question, because ultimately I wouldn't be able to say that one person or one organization could pretend to be boss in this. In a way, everybody really does. As Mariarosaria said, everybody has a responsibility to pitch in and to come together. Certainly the church and church leaders, whether they're Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox or Jewish or other religions, Muslim or Buddhist, there are moral leaders out there who all are human and they recognize the values of humanity, and that there are critical issues at stake in terms of interpersonal interaction, in terms of family integrity, in terms of the common good at a social level, that really need to be brought into serious consideration, what the technological impacts are on those. At the same time, everything starts at home at the same time. So responsibility among parents and families and every user has a responsibility. And I would break it down this way. In terms of responsibility for what? Well, is my communication or any use of my technology, is it truly respecting the dignity of my human person and the dignity of other people as human persons? And is what is being used as a technology, whether it's for communication or any other means, truly respecting what is good for everybody? What is the common good? Is this something that moves society forward, or is it something that leads to humanity devolving as opposed to evolving? And so, yes, government agencies are certainly going to have a very important responsibility, because they have the particular responsibility to move the common good forward and to make sure that society doesn't devolve, but rather evolves, rather is able to progress. But that is going to involve people talking to the representatives, people talking to their senators, talking to the executives, talking to judiciary. Everybody, the big thing about this is technology is affecting every single person, so that everybody can really be involved at all levels.
One of my concerns, Mariarosaria, is something you said, is that in order to have an effective conversation, both parties at least have to have some reasonable understanding of the technologies and their implications. And I think most people feel that there's a big knowledge gap, as you say, between the people that are producing the technologies and the people that are entrusted with regulating them. And that's a fairly substantial gap, I think. At least most people feel that way, I feel. How do we close that? Are you seeing progress in that area, or is it's just something we should be really concerned about?
So no, it's a problem, but I have to say it's also a problem that is less of a problem than it was 5 or 10 years before or ago. Of course, I mean, engineers are going to have a deeper understanding of the technology, the way lawyers are going to have a deeper understanding of the law. These are fields that are not going to be merged. But by talking to each other, they have gained mutual understandings. Take the example of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which we have in Europe. At the moment is the most advanced piece of regulation protecting privacy. Well, that piece rests on a fairly good understanding of the technology. And since it has been approved in Europe, it has also meant that a lot of engineers and private sectors companies working in the area have become much more aware of the risks, legal and ethical, that are linked to data. So these are two roads which are not necessarily parallel. They might be converging without touching or any crossing at any point, but they're getting closer and closer. And if I may go back to the other question, there is a point that is important. These technologies are being implemented throughout the globe. So it's not just about Europe, it's not just about the US. They're not equally adopted around the world. There are countries where these are more pervasive or less pervasive. But when we think about the regulation, it's important that we think about the diversity of values. And it's important that we approach this regulation thinking about the plurality of moral values, of cultural values, religious values, of minorities, of people who have different views. It would be a mistake to think that we can shape one set of moral rules and then we go for it. It would be a backlash. So it's important that we maintain plurality in this.
At the same time, though, I see it as an opportunity, because there are things that bind human beings. I think when you're talking about moral values, everybody, I think, could come to the same conclusion that love is very important to bring people together. And so maybe they would have differences of opinion in terms of what is love and what is not, and that certainly would be worth healthy discussion. But through education and coming together, you might not be able to have a unique set of standards that would be globally adopted, because every culture is going to be different. And I would certainly agree with my colleague here that that we have to have this openness to the diversity that is around the globe. But at the same time, human beings all have a heart. Human beings have two lungs in general, and there are things that keep us in common. We're born out of families that can still, at an anthropological level, speak a truth that really unites us.
Not to go too much into ethics, but there are indeed fundamental values that some studies have identified as something that can be the stepping stone or the foundation of this kind of ethical approach to digital technologies. Some people will say, well, we find these values in human rights. Others will tell you we should think about the principles of bioethics. Bioethics is a huge tradition which rests on the four principles of beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. And those principles, there are no cultures that will deny the values of the principles. Nowhere in the world someone will think, well, we'll give medical care to someone to have maleficence. I mean, that's not the way it works. So we can start building our work on those kind of values, keeping in mind that this is just a stepping stone, this is just the foundations. We need to accommodate plurality if we want really to use this technology for the better.
Let me ask a question that I'm curious about. So let's say that I'm a company and I have a new piece of emerging technology I'm excited about rolling out. Now I recognize that this technology may be perceived to have some ethical implications, okay? Now I as a company, we don't employ ethicists, right? We employ engineers. Where would I go right now for a third-party opinion? If I was looking for expertise on the ethical dimensions of the product I'm about to release, is there a global institution that comes to mind that would be able to offer this service?
So there are different bodies, like you can think of IEEE has developed a few standards there. The UN with the ITU is working, for example, on AI for good. So there are a few places which are emerging, not to mention all the expertise that academia has been building in the past couple of decades. There is no one body rubber stamping you and telling you, well, this is a good ethical technologies. And that would be very, very skeptical if there were one single body in the world which would be like ex autoritate saying, well, no, this is good. Yes, end of the story. It's important that we keep having this debate. Also because technology evolves and change, especially digital technologies, especially AI. So we cannot afford, and we should not afford the idea that, well, we check it at the beginning, and then off we go, we're fine. We don't need to be concerned anymore. We need to understand that as the technology is able to autonomously interact with the environment, learn and refine its behavior, and also as environments change, and so a technology can be used for something that the designers didn't plan for, we need to keep our eyes on. I mean,
And I think this is also a great opportunity to build deeper relationships between religious organizations and industry. There's no reason why industrial leaders cannot call up church leaders and say, we very confidentially are thinking about unrolling this publicly, and we'd like to get your take on this. And whether it's a Catholic leader, such as the Pope and his curia, or it might be Archbishop of Canterbury gets a phone call for the Anglicans, or other Protestant or evangelical leaders, or a Muslim leader in the Middle East, or one of the Hindu bodies in India, or a Buddhist in China. There are plenty of world leaders who are out there who are looking ultimately for the common good, and who could be consulted at a private level to get feedback, to get a private conversation going, much less like we're doing right now, to see if they've thought through all of the issues. Also, certainly, one wonderful thing that Humanity 2.0 is doing right now is bringing a lot of different bodies together just like this. And so there is certainly a place in the academic institutions to do this, but also in the private sector that works together with profit and with nonprofit organizations, with ecclesiastical and other religious leaders, with other leaders coming from the social fabric of our various cultures, to have the dialogue that needs to be had. I mean, I think there's no time like the present to help the technology step back and slow down just slightly to be able to allow for the reflection that only humans can do. Artificial intelligence doesn't reflect through human experience the way that humans can reflect through human experience. And so providing the forum for that, I think is vitally important in this time.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, I like your point that a technology, to understand the ethical risks that technology poses, it's important to understand the context in which the technology will be developed or deployed. Take privacy, for example, which is like kind of a neutral example. Privacy concerns in Europe are completely different from the one that you would have in the US, because the understanding of privacy in these two countries, which have kind of a common culture or shared culture, is different. One is based on dignity, the other is based on free speech, so one is more permissive, the other is not. And so privacy is one example. You can think of many other values which are culturally dependent. So it's crucial that we understand the context in which we are going to deploy the technology to avoid ethical backlash. It's crucial to do so that we understand that diversity and plurality is one of the fundamental values that will shape ethical deployment of these technologies. We need to think of all members of societies, of all possible cultures, because otherwise the risk of infringing on rights it's huge, and this is something we should not be doing.